Good morning. Let's talk about feedback. I was about 4 years into practice with my first group. 3 of us had been hired at the same time. And it was the end of a long week of depositions resulting from the departure of one of the partners and the group suing him over the non-compete. I had been deposed and discredited in an effort to make it appear that this partner also was not reliable. And it was a fairly rough time. It was distracting from my clinical practice and generally not making me feel very comfortable in the group. One of the partners pulled me aside and started off with, "You seem like you're angry." Of course I was angry, and I felt that it was justified, rightfully so. I was being discredited. I was losing clinical time when it really counted in an Eat What You Kill practice, and I just didn't really feel like this was a great fit. And I could have stopped there. I could have completely missed his recommendation to me, which was, "I've been working with a professional coach. I wonder if that might not be an idea for you." And had I remained on my high horse, ignored his, what was really, I believe, advice at that point, although also feedback on what he was observing about me, I might have missed a great opportunity. I went on to work with a coach, had a fantastic, excellent time, really found that this group wasn't a great fit for me, and moved on and found a much better place to practice. It would have been easy to miss that, however, and we miss a lot of great feedback for similar reasons. I want all of you to think today, in your own world, what is something that you do not want feedback on? And what is one thing that you do want feedback on? And by the end of this, I hope that you can name one step that you can take to be effective in receiving feedback. This forms our objectives, which are 2: to examine your answers, to identify potential barriers to receiving feedback, and then identify steps that you can take to receive and or give feedback effectively. If you take nothing else home from this, it would be my recommendation to watch this video. You can find it on YouTube, read the book if you're interested as well, or listen to it. Marcus Buckingham talks about why feedback fails and what we should do instead. The longer exposition is in his book, Love and Work, but he has many short videos on the topic, which are well worth the time investment. What do we all think of as feedback? We think of me telling you something about you that is either right or wrong, and how I either expect or recommend that you will change. Marcus Buckingham would say that the 3 big fallacies of feedback in this script are that we own the truth about others. And this has been demonstrated amply in the literature, that reading systems, including the popular 360 rating systems, really are better at demonstrating our bias than they are anything objective about those who we are rating. It also assumes that learning is information transfer. And we know that that is not the case at all. Learning is insight. And thirdly, that excellence can be defined in advance. And he would argue that we can define a minimum requirement for most jobs and occupations, but excellence is more individual. He counters with the 3 truths of feedback. 1, we know our own reaction. I can be very authentic in telling you how I react to you. Secondly, learning is insight. It's reflection. It's the aha moment. It's not information transfer. And thirdly, that excellence is connected to the individual, and that the nugget in feedback is that the source of our future excellence is in our current goodness. I'd also recommend this book. It is a very long look at how we use feedback and what they term as destructive criticism and even constructive criticism as missing big pieces of the puzzle. And they advocate instead for deconstructive criticism, which actually allows you to examine the underlying assumptions in order to facilitate transformative growth. This is another great read recommendation, lots of individual scenarios, and really takes a deep dive into the vagaries and the types of feedback, both from the recipient and from the giver. It matters whether I am expecting feedback that is appreciation, that I am expecting coaching, or that this is evaluative, that my promotion or my income will rely upon it. They go much more in depth in this in the book, but essentially the big barriers that exist in many of our lives are our reluctance to hear the truth, the relationship we have to the person giving or receiving our feedback, and how it impacts our identity. Back to my initial questions. One thing that I do not want feedback on in this talk is whether I am an expert on giving feedback. I know that I'm not. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm interested in my own journey. I'm interested in training future orthopedic surgeons, and I'm interested in making my environment better. But I am not an expert on this topic. One thing I do want feedback on is what I make you feel in talking about this topic. Does my passion come across? Does my interest come across? Was this helpful to you in any way? I do want feedback on that. Imagine a feedback session in which you tell me how I made you feel, which is your authentic self. You are the expert on how this talk impacts you. And you come up with creative questions for me. How could you have used a video to underscore your message? What assumptions are you examining? And then you pull out the nuggets that you see that I can use that are good today, but could be excellent in the future. How useful would that be to me? Now think about a step that you can take toward being effective in receiving or in giving feedback. An important topic as well, I think, is turning down feedback. There are some times, and as a woman surgeon and frequently questioned in the operating room, there are some times when, no, this isn't the time for feedback about my draping. Might be the wrong time. We have a patient to take care of. It might be too sensitive based on a relationship. And occasionally our relationship is more important than the feedback that you might have. One of the things that I find very useful, as well as this feedback containment chart, as a recipient of feedback, and this I very nearly fell prey to, is differentiating what this is really about and what this is not about. So when you get feedback, is this about whether I'm as productive as I might be? Or is it about my identity, whether I'm a good clinician, a smart colleague, valued team member? Is this about whether my first presentation was as good as I wanted it to be? Or is this about whether I'll ever get a good presentation? And I think the latter, reminding yourself this is not about your identity, but about things that others have impressions of that can actually benefit you and make you even better at what you'd like to do. This is another feedback cheat sheet. As you go to compose your feedback for others, it's helpful to clarify and state outright, what is this about? And what is the expectation at the end of it? Going back to our objectives, your barriers. My barrier in my initial example was my identity and my sort of self-righteous anger. I was thankfully able to see past that, to hear the positive. And I hope today I've given you at least some resources to help identify steps that you can take toward giving and receiving feedback effectively. I call the 4 C's: clarify feedback, remain curious about especially the other's impression, and then channel coaching. Think of this as an ongoing relationship toward optimization. When you're receiving or giving, ask questions. Identify your defenses. Examine your assumptions. And I cannot reiterate enough, watch the Buckingham video. It's fantastic. Thanks very much.